King Arthur never pulled a sword from a stone. Historian Margaret Macmillan once noted that history is a collection of facts we have agreed to embellish. We cling to these popular historical legends because they shape our identity and ideals, but the truth is often far more complex and surprising. What if everything you were taught about the past was only half the story? In this exploration, we will uncover 28 unexpected truths behind the world's most enduring tales, from the real story of the Trojan Horse to the scientific secrets of the Oracle of Delphi. You will gain a completely new perspective on history, one that separates romantic fiction from fascinating fact. We will reveal why Robin Hood may never have lived in Sherwood Forest and what really caused the Salem witch trials. How many of your favorite historical stories are built on a foundation of myth? The image of a sword embedded in stone, waiting for the one true king to claim it, is one of history's most powerful symbols of destiny. Yet the historical roots of King Arthur are far murkier than the legend suggests. He was likely not a single, glorious monarch, but a composite character, a literary fusion of several post-Roman British warlords who fought against invading Saxon armies. Archaeologists point to a frustrating lack of contemporary evidence. There are no 6th century records mentioning a King Arthur, no ruins of a grand castle called Camelot that date to his supposed time. The legend we know today was meticulously crafted centuries later. Writers like Geoffrey of Monmouth in the 12th century took fragments of Welsh folklore and war leader tales, weaving them into a grand narrative for political gain. His book, The History of the Kings of Britain, provided a glorious, mythical past for a nation seeking an identity. The famous Round Table itself, a symbol of equality where every knight had an equal voice, first appeared in the works of the French poet Hoax, further romanticizing the ideal of chivalric order. Excavations at places like Tintagel in Cornwall, often linked to Arthur's conception, reveal a thriving, sophisticated trade settlement of the correct era, but they have uncovered no throne room, no evidence of a centralized royal court. This forces us to ask a profound question. Are our greatest heroes historical figures, or are they mirrors reflecting our own deepest needs for unity, justice, and a destined leader? The story of Arthur is less about a man who was, and more about the ideal he came to represent. The noble outlaw who stole from the rich to give to the poor is a universal symbol of rebellion against injustice. But the historical roots of Robin Hood are as elusive as the man himself. There likely was no single person living in Sherwood Forest who matched the legendary figure. Instead, medieval historians point out that Robin Hood is a composite, a character born from countless campfire stories and ballads about real and imagined bandits. The name itself was a common alias for criminals in old court records, a generic term for any outlaw on the run. The earliest surviving ballads, written down in the 15th century, don't even place him in the familiar setting of Sherwood. He is simply a yeoman, a common man, battling a corrupt local sheriff in Barnesdale, Yorkshire. This reveals a crucial truth. The legend was not set in stone but was a fluid story, constantly adapted to reflect the fears and desires of ordinary people. For centuries, he remained a clever, disgruntled commoner. It was only much later, in the 16th century, that writers transformed him into the dispossessed nobleman, Robin of Locksley. This shift reflected a changing society's preference for a hero with aristocratic blood, a fallen lord fighting his way back to his rightful place. We see similar archetypes in figures like Hereward the Wake, an Anglo-Saxon nobleman who led a guerrilla war against Norman rulers. So why does this matter? The evolution of Robin Hood forces us to ask who gets to shape our heroes. His story was molded and remade by each generation to critique their own authorities and champion their own version of justice. He is less a historical figure and more a cultural vessel, filled and refilled with the spirit of the age. This process of collective storytelling, where a single legend grows from many scattered seeds, mirrors the mysterious origins of our next enigma, a story of a city and a wooden horse. The Trojan Horse stands as an enduring monument to deception, a colossal wooden statue hiding an army within its belly. Yet this iconic symbol of cunning victory might be one of history's greatest misdirections. The earliest and most authoritative account of the Trojan War, Homer's Iliad, makes no mention of this elaborate ruse. The epic poem ends with Hector's funeral, leaving the war's conclusion and the horse's story untold. It is a staggering omission that forces us to question the very foundation of the tale. Classical scholars point out that the first written references to the horse appear centuries after the supposed event, in fragments from lost poems and later Greek dramas. Even more telling is the archaeological record at Hisarlik, the site widely accepted as ancient Troy. Excavations reveal a city that was violently destroyed, showing clear layers of fire and conflict consistent with a siege. But there is no evidence, not a single splinter, to suggest a giant wooden horse was ever built or present. So where did this powerful story come from? One compelling theory suggests the horse was not a physical object but a metaphor. In the ancient world, the horse was a symbol of Poseidon, the god of the sea and earthquakes. The city's walls, according to myth, were built by Poseidon, and a common interpretation is that the wooden horse actually represents a destructive earthquake that shattered Troy's defenses, allowing the Achaean army to pour in. Alternatively, it could have been a poetic name for a formidable siege engine, a battering ram covered in wet horse hides for fire protection that finally broke the city's gates. The version we know today was masterfully cemented by the Roman poet Virgil in the Aeneid. He wrote his epic to glorify Rome's origins, and the dramatic tale of the horse served as a perfect story of Greek cunning and Trojan nobility in defeat, justifying Rome's own imperial destiny. This pattern of a deceptive gift leading to a city's fall is not unique. Similar stories appear in other cultures, like the Arab legend of the Trojan camel used to conquer a fortress. This repetition hints at a universal theme, a shared narrative archetype about the dangers of trusting your enemy's offerings. Does this make the story less valuable? Not at all, but it does ask us why we are so drawn to a single, brilliant trick over the more complex, and likely more brutal, reality of a long and bloody siege. We seem to prefer a clean, clever ending to a messy historical truth. This preference for dramatic legend over nuanced fact follows us to another iconic figure, whose true story has been equally shaped by narrative needs. Cleopatra's image as a seductive temptress is a dramatic fiction crafted by her Roman conquerors. This powerful queen of Egypt was, in reality, a brilliant political strategist and a scholar, fluent in at least 9 languages, who ruled her kingdom with sharp intellect for over 2 decades. Roman propaganda, particularly from Augustus Caesar, systematically recast her as a decadent and dangerous enchantress to justify his war against her and Mark Antony. They needed a villain, and a powerful, independent woman was the perfect target, but the historical record tells a far different story. Cleopatra VII was a Ptolemy, a member of a Greek dynasty that ruled Egypt. She was the first in her line to actually bother learning the Egyptian language, a shrewd move to connect with her people and consolidate her power. Her alliances with Julius Caesar and later Mark Antony were not merely romantic flings. They were calculated political partnerships, desperate attempts to maintain Egyptian sovereignty against the overwhelming expansion of the Roman Republic. She understood that the only way to preserve her nation's independence was to align herself with the most powerful men in Rome. Under her rule, Egypt experienced significant economic prosperity. She reformed the currency, managed the kingdom's vast grain supply with expert care, and was a generous patron of the arts and sciences, restoring temples and supporting the great library of Alexandria. Her primary goal was always the stability and wealth of Egypt, not personal pleasure or conquest. Why is it that a leader of such formidable administrative skill is so often remembered only for her supposed love life? This reduction reflects a persistent tendency to define powerful women by their relationships with powerful men, overshadowing their genuine political and intellectual achievements. Cleopatra's true legacy is one of a last brilliant pharaoh fighting a losing battle to save her ancient kingdom. This theme of a leader's image being warped by their enemies finds a powerful echo in the story of another legendary figure, whose stature has been both magnified and misunderstood for centuries. Napoleon Bonaparte is often remembered as a conqueror, a man whose insatiable ambition plunged Europe into decades of war. Yet this portrait is incomplete, ignoring the other side of the man who was also a revolutionary administrator. Beyond the battlefield, he enacted a series of sweeping reforms that would fundamentally reshape the modern world. His most enduring legacy is arguably the Napoleonic Code, a civil legal framework that replaced a tangled mess of feudal laws with clear, consistent principles. For the first time, it established the ideas of religious tolerance and that government jobs should go to the most qualified, not just those born into noble families. This code championed the rights of the common man, at least in theory, and its influence spread across the globe, forming the basis for legal systems throughout Europe, Latin America, and even parts of North America. He did not stop there. Napoleon completely overhauled France's education system, creating the lycées, state-run secondary schools designed to create a new, educated class of citizens loyal to the state. He was a passionate patron of science and the arts, establishing the Bank of France to stabilize the economy and commissioning grand projects that still define Paris today, like the Arc de Triomphe. His own rise was a testament to this new order. He was not a French king by birth, but a minor noble from Corsica who leveraged his military genius and revolutionary zeal to climb the ranks in a society that was finally starting to reward merit over bloodline. So how do we reconcile the two faces of Napoleon, the reformer who built modern institutions and the emperor who sacrificed millions for his imperial dreams? Perhaps historical figures are not simple archetypes of good or evil, but complex individuals whose legacies are a tapestry of both profound progress and profound cost. His story forces us to hold two contradictory truths in our minds at once, a challenge that follows us directly into the legendary and deeply mythologized era of the American Wild West. The myth of the Wild West is a landscape painted in our minds by countless films and novels, a place of lone gunmen, high-noon duels, and endless frontier chaos. But the actual events of the American West were far less dramatic and far more mundane. For the vast majority of settlers, life was defined not by the crack of a pistol, but by the steady, back-breaking work of farming, building homes, and establishing communities. Historians examining census records and court documents from boom towns like Dodge City or Abilene have found something startling. Their homicide rates were often lower than those in major eastern cities like New York during the same period. While violence certainly existed, the iconic high-noon shootout on a dusty main street was an extreme rarity. Law enforcement, often portrayed as a solitary marshal, was frequently a more organized effort involving town councils, sheriffs, and deputies focused on maintaining order for economic stability. The population itself was remarkably diverse, a tapestry of people often erased from the popular narrative. African American cowboys made up roughly 1 in 4 ranch hands. Women ran successful homesteads and businesses, and Chinese immigrants played vital roles in building railroads and establishing commerce. How then did this complex reality become the simplified saga of outlaws and lawmen we know today? The transformation began almost immediately with dime novels. These cheap, sensational paperbacks took real figures like Billy the Kid and magnified their exploits, turning a young fugitive into a legendary folk hero for a public hungry for excitement. Later, the rise of Hollywood cemented these exaggerated archetypes, creating a powerful and enduring national myth. We must ask ourselves why we feel the need to replace the quiet dignity of homesteaders with the explosive drama of gunslingers. Perhaps the true story of community and perseverance is less thrilling than the fantasy of untamed individualism and swift justice. This process of romanticizing a past era is not unique to America. On the other side of the world, another warrior class has been similarly mythologized, their complex history polished into a simple code of honor. The noble samurai, bound by an unbreakable code of honor, is a powerful symbol of loyalty and self-sacrifice. Yet the Bushido we envision today, the so-called way of the warrior, is not an ancient, unchanging law. It was largely a product of peace, not war, formalized centuries after the age of great samurai battles had ended. During the chaotic Sengoku period, when these warriors truly shaped Japan's history, they were far more pragmatic. Their primary concern was not abstract honor, but survival, loyalty to their immediate lord, and victory on the battlefield. A samurai's allegiance could shift if it meant securing a better position or preserving their family's lands. Accounts from the time detail instances of betrayal, surprise attacks on unsuspecting enemies, and strategic retreats that would be considered dishonorable by the later Bushido standard. The code as we know it began to coalesce during the stable Edo period, a time of over 200 years of internal peace. With no major wars to fight, the samurai class needed a new purpose. Philosophers and administrators began to weave together threads from various influences, including Zen Buddhism's emphasis on discipline and Shinto's focus on purity, to create an ethical framework that would justify the samurai's privileged social position. This idealized version was then dramatically amplified and weaponized in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. The Meiji government and later nationalist leaders took this romanticized Bushido and turned it into a powerful propaganda tool, promoting blind loyalty to the emperor and a cult of patriotic self-sacrifice that would fuel Japan's militaristic expansion. The famous act of seppuku, or ritual suicide, was transformed from a way for a defeated warrior to avoid capture into an ultimate symbol of devotion to the state. So we must ask, how often are codes of honor manipulated long after the fact to serve new political or social needs? The story of Bushido is not one of a timeless creed, but of an ideal constantly reshaped to control a warrior class and later an entire nation. This retroactive application of virtue to a more complex past finds a strange parallel in the myths of ancient Egypt, where the legacy of a powerful pharaoh was systematically erased for political reasons. The majestic pyramids of Giza pierce the sky, monuments of such staggering scale that for centuries they have invited wild speculation about lost technologies and alien architects. Yet the truth, grounded in painstaking archaeology, reveals a purpose far more profound than hidden treasure. These colossal structures were the ultimate religious machines, designed with one sacred goal: to safely launch a pharaoh's soul into the afterlife. Egyptologists explain that every aspect of their design served this cosmic function. The narrow shafts piercing the inner chambers were not ventilation ducts, but precisely aligned passageways pointing directly at key stars in the northern sky, believed to be the eternal resting place of the gods. The entire pyramid complex, from the mortuary temple to the causeway, was a meticulously planned landscape for the deceased king's transformation into a divine being, an Ak who would continue to rule and ensure the cosmic order from beyond the grave. This was not a sudden invention. We can trace the pyramid's evolution from simple pit graves to the monumental stack of mastabas that forms the step pyramid of Djoser, and finally to the smooth-sided perfection of the Great Pyramid. Each iteration refined the formula for immortality. The workforce that achieved this was not the army of tortured slaves depicted in Hollywood epics. Archaeological discoveries at Giza itself have uncovered extensive workers' villages, complete with bakeries, infirmaries, and burial grounds. These remains tell a story of skilled, seasonal laborers, farmers who worked on the royal project when the Nile flood made their fields untouchable. They were fed, housed, and honored for their contribution to a national endeavor that guaranteed the prosperity of Egypt itself. So why is there such a powerful urge to attribute these wonders to outside, even extraterrestrial forces? Perhaps the sheer magnitude of human achievement, the coordinated effort of thousands over decades, is a concept so vast it feels easier to explain with a magical shortcut. Acknowledging the pyramids as the product of organized human faith and labor does not diminish them. It elevates the story to one of a civilization's unified belief in eternity. This same impulse to simplify a complex culture into a single, fearsome trait appears again with the legendary seafarers of the North, whose story is far more nuanced than their horned helmets suggest. The fierce image of the Viking raider, axe in hand and longship prow cutting through coastal mist, is a legacy written by their terrified victims. Medieval monks whose monasteries were often targets painted them as pagans and pirates, a portrait that has endured for 1,000 years. But this is only a fragment of their story. The Norse were, perhaps more accurately, master traders, intrepid explorers, and ambitious settlers who established a cultural network stretching from the Caspian Sea to the coast of Canada. While their raids were real and devastating, they were a seasonal activity for some, not the entirety of their civilization. The archaeological record tells a vastly different tale from the chronicles of their foes. Excavations from Dublin to Kiev reveal thriving trade centers established by the Vikings, dealing in everything from Scandinavian furs and amber to Arabic silver and fine Frankish swords. They were the backbone of a commercial web that connected the disparate corners of the medieval world. Their seafaring prowess was not just for plunder. It led them to settle the empty lands of Iceland and Greenland, and around the year 1000, Leif Erikson successfully led an expedition to a place he called Vinland, establishing a short-lived settlement in North America centuries before Columbus. Their society was surprisingly complex, governed by a legal assembly known as the Thing, where free men could settle disputes and make laws. Their artistic legacy is not one of brute force, but of intricate metalwork, elaborate woodcarving, and the epic poetry of the sagas, which preserved their history and mythology. Even the role of women defied the simplistic raider narrative. A Viking woman could own property, initiate a divorce, and run the farmstead for years while her husband was away on voyages. The settlement of Iceland was largely a family enterprise, with women playing a crucial role in building a new society from the ground up. So why does the violent raider so completely overshadow the skilled merchant and the pioneering farmer? Perhaps it is because conflict makes for a more dramatic story, one that those who held the pens had a vested interest in telling. The peaceful integration of settlers and the complex workings of trade routes are quiet histories, easily drowned out by the clash of steel and the roar of a longship beaching on a foreign shore. This tendency to magnify the violent and obscure the nuanced is a pattern we see again and again, leading us directly to the next great mirage of history, a city of gold that never was. The legend of El Dorado did not begin with a city, but with a single, shimmering man. This myth that consumed the ambitions of European explorers for centuries was born from a profound misunderstanding of a sacred ritual. High in the Andes, the Muisca people of Colombia practiced a ceremony to inaugurate a new chief. The ruler, referred to as the Zipa, would be covered in gold dust, transforming him into a living, breathing golden man, El Dorado. He would then journey to the center of Lake Guatavita on a ceremonial raft, laden with offerings of gold and emeralds, which were cast into the sacred waters as a tribute to the gods. For the Muisca, this was not about material wealth, but about spiritual power and a connection to the divine. When Spanish conquistadors heard fragments of this story, their minds, already feverish with dreams of wealth, seized upon the golden man and transformed him into a golden city. Anthropologists point to this as a classic case of cross-cultural misinterpretation, where a complex spiritual practice was stripped of its meaning and reduced to a literal treasure map. The story mutated with each retelling, moving from a man to a city to an entire empire paved with gold, its location always shifting just beyond the next mountain range. This phantom city became the engine for a massive wave of exploration and brutal colonization. Expeditions led by men like Gonzalo Pizarro and Sir Walter Raleigh plunged into the uncharted jungles of South America, driven by a fantasy. These quests had devastating real-world consequences. They led to the enslavement and deaths of countless indigenous people, the destruction of ecosystems, and bloody conflicts between rival European powers. The actual gold that inspired the legend was indeed real. Over the centuries, significant Muisca artifacts, including the famous golden raft depicting the ceremony itself, have been dredged from Lake Guatavita, confirming the ritual's existence. But these objects were tokens of faith, not the discarded riches of a mythical metropolis. The relentless search for El Dorado forces us to ask a difficult question. Why are we so willing to destroy a tangible reality in pursuit of an intoxicating fiction? The true treasure was never a hidden city, but the vibrant, sophisticated cultures that were plundered and lost in its name. This pattern of a geographical mystery consuming those who seek it finds a chilling parallel in our next enigma, a place where ships and planes were said to vanish without a trace. The legend of El Dorado was a mirage that consumed entire expeditions, but our next mystery is a real location on the map, a place where the line between fact and fiction has been dangerously blurred. The Bermuda Triangle's reputation as a supernatural graveyard for ships and planes is one of the 20th century's most enduring enigmas. Yet oceanographers and aviation experts have long argued that the disappearances within this area, bounded by Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico, are not the work of alien abductions or time warps, but of identifiable natural forces. The first and most common culprit is simply human error. This region is one of the most heavily trafficked stretches of water and air in the world. With such a high volume of vessels and aircraft, the statistical probability of accidents increases significantly. Compounding this is the area's notoriously unpredictable and severe weather. Sudden, powerful local storms can generate massive waves and microbursts of wind capable of swamping a ship or forcing a plane into a fatal dive before a distress call can even be completed. One of the most cited scientific explanations involves methane hydrates. Vast deposits of this frozen, gas-saturated solid lie trapped on the ocean floor. A sudden landslide or shift in pressure could cause these hydrates to release enormous bubbles of methane gas. This would drastically reduce the density of the water, causing a ship to lose buoyancy and sink almost instantly without warning. The area is also known for its magnetic anomalies. Compass variations are a documented fact here, as true north and magnetic north can align, creating confusion for navigators who are not prepared for the discrepancy. In the days before advanced GPS, a simple compass error could lead a plane or ship fatally off course into the vast, empty expanse of the Atlantic. Then there is the phenomenon of rogue waves. These are not mythical sea monsters, but scientifically confirmed walls of water that can reach heights of 100 feet, appearing suddenly and with enough force to snap a large ship in two. The specific underwater topography and current patterns of the Bermuda Triangle make it a prime candidate for the formation of these devastating waves. The case of Flight 19 is often held up as the ultimate proof of the triangle's strange power. In 1945, 5 U.S. Navy Avenger bombers vanished on a routine training mission. The official Navy investigation concluded the most likely cause was that the squadron's experienced leader, Lieutenant Charles Taylor, became disoriented after his compass failed. He mistakenly led his flight further out to sea until they simply ran out of fuel. The subsequent loss of a rescue plane is attributed to a catastrophic mechanical failure, likely an explosion. The mystery was not a supernatural event, but a tragic cascade of navigational error, bad weather, and misfortune, later sensationalized by magazine writers who coined the name Bermuda Triangle. So why does the myth persist with such tenacious grip? Perhaps it is human nature to seek patterns and assign grand, mysterious causes to random tragedies. The cold, hard data of statistics and weather patterns is far less compelling than the idea of a secret vortex at the edge of our understanding. Demystifying the Bermuda Triangle does not make the ocean any less powerful or dangerous. It simply returns our respect to the real forces of nature, a respect that is utterly essential when confronting our next great historical mirage, the lost civilization of Atlantis. Plato's story of a sophisticated island civilization that vanished beneath the waves is the ultimate historical ghost story. Yet the philosopher who first described Atlantis never intended it to be taken as literal history. In his dialogues Timaeus and Critias, written around 360 BCE, Plato used the tale as a powerful philosophical allegory. He paints a picture of an advanced, powerful society that gradually succumbs to greed and imperial ambition, ultimately provoking the wrath of the gods who sink their island in a single day and night. For Plato, Atlantis was a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris and the moral decay that can destroy even the most perfect state. Classicists point to a glaring absence in the historical record. No other ancient Greek or Egyptian texts, which Plato claimed were his source, ever mention this lost empire. This silence strongly suggests that Atlantis was a fictional device, an illustrative myth crafted to serve a moral argument about the ideal society and its potential downfall. So where did the idea come from if it was entirely invented? Many scholars believe Plato was inspired by a real, catastrophic event that resonated deeply in the Greek world, the colossal volcanic eruption of Thera. This island, now known as Santorini, was the heart of the Minoan civilization, a sophisticated Bronze Age culture that dominated the Aegean Sea. Around the year 1600 BC, Thera exploded in one of the largest volcanic events in human history. The eruption obliterated the Minoan settlement at Akrotiri, burying it under layers of ash and pumice in a dramatic instant. The subsequent tsunamis and climatic effects likely crippled the wider Minoan civilization on Crete, leading to its eventual decline. The archaeological site at Akrotiri offers a stunning glimpse of a world frozen in time. Excavations reveal a wealthy, complex society with multi-story buildings, vibrant frescoes, and advanced plumbing, a civilization that was indeed advanced and then suddenly erased. It is not difficult to see how such a cataclysm could have echoed through centuries of oral tradition, eventually providing the raw material for Plato's sunken continent. Despite this compelling explanation, the myth of Atlantis has taken on a life of its own. It has been co-opted and reshaped by every generation, from Renaissance scholars who saw it as a lost utopia to pseudo-historians of the 19th and 20th centuries who placed it everywhere from Antarctica to the Azores. These ongoing searches, while fueled by a genuine sense of wonder, often tell us more about our own desires for a hidden golden age than they do about the ancient past. The story forces us to ask a critical question: do we value a legend more for its historical truth or for the timeless moral lesson it was designed to teach? The allure of a lost world continues to pull at our imagination, a siren call very similar to the quest for another legendary wonder, a spring whose waters promise to reverse the flow of time itself. Ponce de Leon's famed quest for a spring that restored youth was never about a literal fountain. The Spanish explorer was, by all historical accounts, focused on the practical ambitions of his era, securing new lands and discovering sources of gold and slaves. The myth of his search for immortality only attached itself to his name decades after his death, woven into his biography by chroniclers who sought to add a layer of romantic legend to the brutal reality of colonization. Historians examining his own logs and official orders find no mention of a magical spring, only instructions to explore, claim territory, and subdue the native populations. The legend did not spring from a vacuum, however. It grew from a fertile ground of misunderstanding. When Europeans arrived in the Caribbean, they heard indigenous tales of a mythical land called Bimini, a place that held a river with restorative powers. These stories were not about defying death, but were deeply spiritual accounts of healing and purification, waters that could cure sickness, not reverse age. The Europeans, with their own cultural obsessions with eternal life and earthly paradise, took these metaphors and made them literal. They transformed a spiritual concept into a physical destination on a map. This process was supercharged by the printing press. As the story circulated through Europe, it was embellished in popular chapbooks and placed onto maps as a real location, a cartographic phantom that lured countless others to their doom in the sweltering Florida wilderness. Even today, the power of this myth endures. Modern wellness spas and cosmetic companies explicitly use the fountain of youth as a marketing symbol, selling the promise of rejuvenation through water therapies and anti-aging treatments. This raises a profound question that echoes beyond this one legend. Why does the dream of immortality, of stopping the clock, resonate so powerfully across nearly every human culture? Perhaps it is not about the physical body at all, but a deeper fear of oblivion and a universal yearning for renewal. The fountain of youth, much like the legend of the Holy Grail, is less a lost artifact and more a mirror reflecting our timeless struggle with our own mortality. The quest for the Holy Grail represents the ultimate Arthurian test of purity and divine favor, yet the legend of this sacred cup was a literary invention that grew and transformed over centuries. In its earliest forms, the Grail was not a Christian relic at all. Medieval scholars point to its roots in ancient Celtic mythology, where magical cauldrons that provided endless food and revived the dead were central to tales of the otherworld. These vessels of plenty symbolized sovereignty and rebirth, concepts that were later absorbed and repurposed. It was the French poet Chrétien de Troyes in the late 12th century who first introduced the Grail into Arthurian romance. In his unfinished story, Percival, the Grail is a mysterious platter or dish carried in a procession, but its nature and significance are left tantalizingly unexplained. The object was not yet the cup of Christ. This ambiguity allowed other writers to expand the myth. Robert de Boron, shortly after, was the one who definitively Christianized the legend, identifying the Grail as the chalice used by Jesus at the Last Supper and later used to catch his blood at the crucifixion. This transformation turned the Grail from a magical artifact into the ultimate Christian relic, its pursuit becoming a spiritual journey for the knight worthy enough to find it. The German poet Wolfram von Eschenbach took this a step further, reimagining the Grail not as a cup but as a stone that fell from heaven, providing sustenance and granting eternal youth to a sacred order of knights. This constant evolution reveals a crucial truth. The Grail was never a single, fixed object. It was a narrative vessel, its meaning and form shifting to reflect the spiritual and political concerns of the society telling the story. In the High Middle Ages, the Grail quest became a powerful allegory for the ideal of knighthood, one that balanced martial prowess with inner piety and chastity. The failure of most knights to achieve the Grail and the success of the pure Sir Galahad underscored a new religious ideal for the warrior class. This symbolism was richly depicted in the art of the time, from illuminated manuscripts to tapestries, where the Grail often glowed with a heavenly light, just out of reach of all but the most virtuous. In the modern era, the Grail's story has been reinterpreted once again. It has been linked to theories about the bloodline of Jesus, portrayed as a secret kept by shadowy organizations, or seen as a metaphor for a personal spiritual awakening. Alleged locations for the Grail, from the Pyrenees to Glastonbury in England, continue to draw seekers, though historians find no evidence to support these claims. Its enduring power is clear in its constant presence in films and books, from the earnest quest in Monty Python to the historical conspiracy of the Da Vinci Code. Why does this single object hold such a powerful grip on our collective imagination? Perhaps because the Grail represents the ultimate prize, a symbol of divine connection and ultimate truth that is always just beyond our grasp. Its true story is not one of a lost artifact, but of our own endless search for meaning, a search that requires us to decipher clues from the past, much like the scholars who finally unlocked the secrets of the Rosetta Stone. The Rosetta Stone is far more than a slab of black granodiorite. Its true power lies not in the stone itself, but in the mundane bureaucratic decree it carries, a message repeated in 3 distinct scripts. This administrative document, issued by priests in 196 BC, praises the young pharaoh Ptolemy V, granting him tax breaks and divine honors. The stone's world-changing significance comes from its parallel texts. The same proclamation was written in formal hieroglyphs, the everyday Demotic script, and crucially in ancient Greek, a language scholars already understood. This provided the first reliable key to a locked door that had been closed for over 1,000 years. For centuries, hieroglyphs were seen as magical symbols, their meaning lost to time. The breakthrough came not from a sudden flash of insight, but from the relentless, painstaking work of the French scholar Jean-François Champollion. He spent years comparing the 3 texts, initially following a rival who believed the hieroglyphs were purely symbolic. Champollion's genius was in realizing they were a complex mix of phonetic sounds and conceptual signs. He focused on royal names like Ptolemy and Cleopatra, which were enclosed in cartouches. By matching the Greek names to the hieroglyphic characters within these ovals, he began to crack their phonetic code, finally proving that the ancient Egyptian language was the direct ancestor of Coptic, a language he had mastered. The stone's own history is a tale of imperial conflict. It was discovered in 1799 by French soldiers stationed at Fort Julian in the Nile Delta, part of Napoleon Bonaparte's ambitious Egyptian campaign. When the French were defeated, the stone, along with other antiquities, was transferred to British possession under the terms of the Treaty of Alexandria. It has been a centerpiece of the British Museum since 1802, yet the political context of the decree itself is equally revealing. It was created during a period of great unrest in Egypt. Ptolemy V was a child ruler facing widespread revolts. The priests who issued this decree on the stone were essentially engaging in a public relations campaign, solidifying the king's power by reaffirming his divine status and his generous policies towards the temples. The Rosetta Stone was in its own time a piece of political propaganda. Similar multilingual inscriptions have been found elsewhere, like the Behistun inscription in Iran, which used Old Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian to cement the power of King Darius the Great. This raises a profound ethical question for us today. As we stand before such an object in a museum, do we see a shared human treasure rightly displayed for global study, or a cultural spoil of war that should be returned to its land of origin? The stone's journey from a forgotten fort to an international symbol forces us to confront the complex legacy of how historical knowledge is acquired and who gets to hold it. This tension between power, secrecy, and historical legacy finds a powerful echo in the misunderstood story of another legendary order, the Knights Templar. 16th truth, the Knights Templar were not the secretive cult of legend, but the world's first multinational corporation. Their image as guardians of forbidden relics and lost treasures is a dramatic fiction that obscures their true revolutionary role. Founded in the early 12th century after the First Crusade, their official mission was simple and practical: to protect Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem. Yet they quickly evolved into something far more sophisticated. They were a monastic military order, monks who were also warriors, bound by vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. Their genius, however, lay not in their swords but in their ledgers. Medieval historians point to their creation of an ingenious international banking network. A pilgrim could deposit funds at a Templar house in London and receive a coded letter of credit, allowing them to withdraw the equivalent amount in Jerusalem. This eliminated the need to carry vulnerable chests of coin across bandit-infested roads. They became the trusted financial managers for kings and popes, effectively inventing concepts like check writing and safe deposit boxes. Their fortresses across the Holy Land were not just military strongholds, but secure treasury houses and the hubs of a vast economic empire. This immense financial power is what ultimately led to their downfall. King Philip IV of France, deeply in debt to the order, saw an opportunity. In 1307, he launched a ruthless campaign to destroy them, arresting Templars across France on trumped-up charges of heresy, blasphemy, and obscene secret rituals. Under brutal torture, many knights, including the Grand Master Jacques de Molay, confessed to these fabricated crimes. The order was officially dissolved by the Pope under intense political pressure, and its lands and assets were seized by rival orders and royal coffers. The dramatic image of de Molay cursing the king and pope from his pyre cemented their legend as tragic, wronged heroes. But what about their fabled treasure, the source of so many conspiracy theories? Extensive searches of their Paris headquarters and other preceptories found no hidden vaults of gold or relics like the Holy Grail. Their real wealth was tied up in their extensive land holdings, their commercial enterprises, and the vast sums of money they had loaned out. While the order was dissolved, many members were not executed. Some were pensioned off, while others simply transferred to different military orders like the Knights Hospitaller, quietly continuing their lives. The romanticized image of the Templars as doomed guardians of a great secret was born from this violent end and the vacuum of information that followed. It is a story so compelling that it inspired the creation of modern fraternal organizations, which draw on the Templar name and iconography for a sense of historical prestige and mystery. Why does the truth of their financial acumen feel less captivating than the fantasy of their hidden knowledge? Perhaps because we are drawn to stories of martyrdom and secret societies more than we are to tales of sound fiscal management. The legend of the Templars asks us who we would rather believe in: pragmatic banker monks or the last keepers of a sacred trust. This transformation of a powerful institution into a mythological archetype finds a powerful parallel in the story of another legendary group of warriors whose very existence was once dismissed as pure fantasy: the Amazons of Greek myth. Greek myths describe the Amazons as a fearsome tribe of warrior women who lived at the edge of the known world, a society that inverted Greek norms by placing female power and martial skill at its center. These women, who fought heroes like Hercules and Achilles, were long dismissed as pure fantasy, a patriarchal cautionary tale about the dangers of inverted gender roles. Yet the ground itself has begun to tell a different story, one that blurs the line between myth and history. Across the vast Eurasian steppes from the Black Sea to Mongolia, archaeologists have been unearthing graves of nomadic Scythian peoples, and a significant number of these burials contain a startling combination: a female skeleton accompanied by a full arsenal of weapons. These are not symbolic tokens, they are functional iron swords, quivers full of arrows and armor, laid to rest with women who are clearly warriors. Expert analysis of the bones provides even more compelling evidence. Some of these female skeletons show clear signs of violent battle trauma, such as arrowheads embedded in bone and skull fractures from axe or mace blows, injuries that could only have been sustained in combat. One of the most famous examples is a burial discovered in Russia, where a young woman was interred with a dagger, a quiver of 40 bronze-tipped arrows, and an iron sword. Her legs were bowed from a lifetime on horseback, and her posture suggested she was an archer. How did the Greeks know of these women? It is highly likely that as Greek colonists established cities on the Black Sea coast, they encountered stories, or even the people themselves, of these formidable horse-riding nomads. The Scythians were a decentralized culture where women frequently fought alongside men, a concept that would have been both shocking and fascinating to the male-dominated Greek city-states. Greek writers, trying to make sense of these reports, likely condensed and mythologized them, transforming an entire culture of skilled female riders into a single, legendary tribe of man-hating Amazons. This reinterpretation is visible in Greek art, where Amazons or Amazon-like figures are depicted in intricate detail on vases and sculptures, often shown as worthy and powerful adversaries to Greek heroes. This archaeological evidence has profoundly influenced modern feminist interpretations, reclaiming the Amazons not as monsters, but as possible reflections of real, autonomous women whose existence challenged the social structures of the ancient world. The discovery forces us to ask a pivotal question. How many other myths are not pure inventions, but distant, distorted echoes of real cultural encounters? The story of the Amazons is a powerful reminder that legends often have a foot in a tangible, if misunderstood, reality, a theme that carries directly into our next artifact, whose legendary status was also built on a foundation of creative fiction. Mysterious crystal skulls, said to be ancient Mesoamerican relics of immense power, have captivated the world for over a century. Legends describe them as vessels of psychic energy, tools of prophecy, or artifacts from lost civilizations like Atlantis. Yet the most startling truth is not their mystical origin, but their modern one. The vast majority of these perfectly polished quartz skulls were almost certainly crafted in the 19th century, not by ancient artisans, but by skilled lapidaries in workshops in Germany and France. Anthropologists and gemologists who have subjected the skulls to rigorous analysis point to one undeniable piece of evidence: the tool marks. High-powered microscopes reveal minute, parallel striations left by rotary wheels and diamond-tipped drills, technologies that simply did not exist in the pre-Columbian Americas. Ancient Mesoamerican carvers used hand-powered tools like bow drills, sand, and water abrasives, which create a distinctly different, more irregular surface. The precision of the jaws and the perfect symmetry of the eye sockets in the most famous skulls would have been nearly impossible to achieve with the tools available 1,000 years ago. The skulls emerged on the European art market at a time of intense fascination with the occult and spiritualism. They perfectly fit a romanticized and often inaccurate vision of ancient mysticism, becoming prized objects for seances and private collectors. By the 1950s, their legend had grown so powerful that major museums, including the Smithsonian and the British Museum, acquired them as genuine antiquities. It was only decades later, through advanced scientific analysis, that these institutions publicly debunked their own prized possessions, stating there was no evidence for their pre-Columbian origins. The most famous of all, the Mitchell-Hedges skull, is shrouded in its own web of controversy. It was reportedly discovered by adventurer F.A. Mitchell-Hedges' adopted daughter, Anna, in the 1920s in a Mayan ruin in Belize. However, there is no record of the skull in Mitchell-Hedges' own writings about that expedition, and compelling evidence suggests he actually purchased it at a Sotheby's auction in London in 1943. Anna Mitchell-Hedges maintained the discovery story for the rest of her life, and the skull's uncanny perfection, including a separate, movable jawbone, has made it the centerpiece of the legend. The enduring allure of these objects is clear in their influence on popular culture, most notably inspiring the plot of the Indiana Jones film, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. This raises a profound and reflective question: why are we so eager to imbue inanimate objects with supernatural power and an ancient, mysterious past? Perhaps it is a desire to connect with a history that feels more magical than our own, a world where advanced knowledge was lost to time. The crystal skulls are not portals to a forgotten world, but mirrors reflecting our own longing for wonder. Demystifying their true origin does not make them less fascinating. It simply shifts the story from one of ancient magic to one of modern ambition, a tale of clever artisans and a public hungry for mystery. This same collision of fact and fiction, of a tangible object at the center of an enduring enigma, lies at the heart of our next great maritime legend, the ghost ship Mary Celeste. The ghost ship Mary Celeste remains one of the ocean's most chilling enigmas, a vessel discovered sailing itself in the calm Atlantic in December 1872. When the British brig Dei Gracia spotted her, she was perfectly seaworthy, her sails partially set and her lifeboat missing. Her cargo of industrial alcohol was largely intact, and there was a 6-month supply of food and water. But the captain, his family, and the entire crew of 7 had vanished without a trace. The logbook's last entry was days old, offering no clue to the disaster. The legend of a ship abandoned for no reason, however, is a fiction built on sensational news reports. Maritime historians point to a far more plausible and human sequence of events. The ship's cargo was 1,700 barrels of denatured alcohol. During a voyage through rough weather, it is likely that some barrels leaked, filling the hold with potent, flammable fumes. Captain Benjamin Briggs, a prudent and experienced seaman, would have known the danger. A spark from a lamp or a stove could have turned the ship into an inferno. The most logical theory is that the crew, smelling the fumes and fearing an imminent explosion, made the desperate but rational decision to abandon ship. They likely launched the lifeboat, tethering it to the Mary Celeste with a long line, intending to wait at a safe distance until the danger passed. This is where tragedy compounded. A sudden squall or a simple snap of the line could have sent the small boat adrift, leaving the crew to the mercy of the open ocean while their perfectly sound ship sailed on without them. The story was immediately seized upon by newspapers, particularly a sensationalist piece in a magazine called the Atlantic Mutual, which spun tales of half-eaten meals and a sword left on the captain's bed, details that were pure invention. This media frenzy gave birth to outlandish theories involving pirates, sea monsters, and even alien abduction, obscuring the simple human drama of a calculated risk that went terribly wrong. Other derelict ships have been found throughout history, like the SV Seabird, discovered run aground with no crew, its fate likely explained by a rogue wave. So why does the Mary Celeste, with its likely mundane explanation, hold such a powerful grip on us? Perhaps because an unsolved mystery is a blank canvas for our deepest fears and wildest imaginations. We are drawn to the eerie silence of an empty ship, a story without an ending, more than we are to the tragic, yet understandable, story of a captain's fatal judgment call. This human need to find sinister patterns in random tragedy leads us from a ghost ship on the high seas to a dark political mystery at the very heart of the British monarchy, the fate of the princes in the Tower. The disappearance of two young princes in the Tower of London is a political mystery that has stained the pages of history for over 500 years. In 1483, 12-year-old King Edward V and his younger brother Richard were placed in the Tower for their own protection by their uncle, Richard, Duke of Gloucester. They were never seen again. The popular narrative, immortalized by William Shakespeare, paints their uncle, now King Richard III, as a monstrous usurper who ordered their deaths to secure his stolen throne. Yet the historical evidence is far from conclusive, and modern historians point to a troubling lack of any solid proof directly linking Richard to the crime. The case against him rests heavily on the account of Sir Thomas More, written decades after the fact, under the reign of the very dynasty that defeated Richard. This account is filled with dramatic, unverifiable details that read more like political propaganda than a factual report. Other compelling suspects emerge from the shadows of history, most notably Henry VII, the Tudor king who defeated Richard at the Battle of Bosworth. The princes were a far greater threat to Henry than they ever were to Richard. They were his rivals for the throne, and their continued existence would have fueled endless rebellions against his fledgling dynasty. For Henry, their deaths were a political necessity. The discovery of two small skeletons under a staircase in the Tower in 1674 seemed to offer grim confirmation. They were presumed to be the princes and were reburied in Westminster Abbey. Yet modern science has been unable to provide a definitive answer. The bones have never been subjected to modern forensic analysis, including DNA testing, leaving their identity and the cause of their death a matter of speculation. This leaves us with a profound question. How much of what we accept as historical fact is simply the story written by the winners? The Tudors had every reason to blacken Richard's name and every opportunity to do so. Richard III was a complex ruler in a brutal time, the Wars of the Roses, a period where the crown was won and lost on the battlefield. His reign, though short, was marked by competent administration and legal reforms that benefited the common people. His reputation rehabilitation is a powerful reminder that history is not a fixed record, but a narrative constantly being revised. The enduring mystery of the princes forces us to confront the uncomfortable reality that we may never know the truth. It is a story of power, ambition, and the tragic vulnerability of children caught in a deadly game of thrones. This same lethal combination of fear, suspicion, and the breakdown of social order would soon manifest across the Atlantic in a community gripped by a very different kind of hysteria. Salem in 1692 was a community tearing itself apart from the inside. The horror of the witch trials, which led to the execution of 20 people, was not a simple story of superstition. Historians now understand it as a tragic explosion of social tensions, economic disputes, and mass hysteria. The rigid Puritan society was under immense stress. A recent smallpox epidemic, fears of attacks from neighboring Native American tribes, and long-simmering rivalries between wealthy port families and poorer farming families created a pressure cooker of anxiety. When a group of young girls began having violent fits, the community desperately sought a tangible explanation for their suffering. The legal procedures of the time heavily favored the accusers. The court allowed spectral evidence, meaning a victim could testify that the ghost or specter of the accused had tormented them, an accusation that was impossible for the defendant to disprove. This created a perfect storm where personal vendettas could be lethally weaponized. Take the case of Tituba, an enslaved woman in the Paris household. She was one of the first accused, and under intense pressure, she confessed and provided sensational, detailed stories of witchcraft that fueled the community's panic. Her confession, likely a desperate bid to save herself, gave official credence to the hysteria and set a dangerous precedent. Other accusers, often from poorer families, found a sudden and terrifying power to settle old scores with their more prosperous neighbors. A prominent theory that attempts to explain the physical symptoms of the accusers points to ergot poisoning. Ergot is a fungus that can grow on damp rye grain, and when ingested, it causes convulsions, hallucinations, and the sensation of crawling skin, symptoms that match the girls' reported afflictions perfectly. Whether the cause was biological, psychological, or a combination of both, the aftermath was a sobering lesson. The trials ended almost as abruptly as they began. Within years, the colony recognized the terrible miscarriage of justice. The court declared the trials unlawful, and a juror publicly begged for forgiveness. The government eventually offered financial reparations to the families of the victims, a formal, if belated, acknowledgement of the grave error. This chapter forces us to ask a difficult question. How easily can fear and groupthink override our basic principles of justice, turning neighbors against neighbors? The story of Salem is a permanent warning about what can happen when a society, gripped by panic, looks for monsters and finds only itself. This same pattern of a community seizing with a mysterious, collective physical mania appears again in a very different time and place, during the strange phenomenon known as the Dancing Plague. The streets of Strasbourg in the summer of 1518 were not filled with music, but with a terrifying, involuntary compulsion. It began with one woman, Frau Trophia, who stepped into the street and began to dance, not for joy, but with a frantic, unstoppable energy. Within a week, dozens more had joined her, their bodies convulsing in a relentless, exhausting dance that lasted for days, and in some tragic cases, weeks. People danced until their feet bled, until they collapsed from heart attacks or strokes, some literally dancing themselves to death. For centuries, this event was blamed on a curse or demonic possession. But modern psychology offers a far more revealing diagnosis: mass psychogenic illness. This phenomenon occurs when extreme psychological distress, often within a close-knit community, manifests as physical symptoms in a group of people. Historians note that Strasbourg was a pressure cooker of despair that year. The region was gripped by severe famine, devastating outbreaks of syphilis and smallpox, and crippling religious anxieties in the wake of the Reformation. People lived in a state of constant high-alert fear, believing their suffering was a punishment from God. When one person, likely in a state of dissociative breakdown, began to dance, it provided a template. The shared belief in curses and saints, combined with the unbearable social stress, created a perfect storm. The mind, with no other outlet, expressed its terror through the body, a physical contagion of psychological pain. The city's response, based on a folk belief that the dancers needed to dance the curse out of their system, only made things worse. They built a stage, hired musicians, and encouraged the dancing, inadvertently fueling the very hysteria they sought to cure. This was not an isolated event. Similar outbreaks of compulsive dancing or tarantism were recorded across medieval Europe, often linked to the belief that a tarantula's bite could only be cured by frantic dancing. These episodes force us to consider the incredible power of the mind-body connection, especially under the pressure of a collective belief. How thin is the line between individual sanity and communal madness when a community's fear becomes a physical reality? The dancing plague shows us that history's strangest events are often not supernatural, but deeply human, a desperate physical cry from a psyche pushed to its absolute limit. This collective nightmare, born from the shadows of a troubled community, finds a darkly fictional counterpart in another legend born from a very real and very personal fear of the unknown. Washington Irving's ghostly rider chasing Ichabod Crane through the woods is a classic American scare, but the Headless Horseman's roots are buried deep in the soil of post-revolutionary anxiety. The tale, published in 1820, is far more than a simple campfire story. Literary historians point to Irving's own travels through Europe, where he would have encountered ancient Germanic and Dutch folklore filled with headless phantoms. These figures, like the German Kopfloser Reiter, were often the restless spirits of soldiers or noblemen who died violently, doomed to wander until they found peace. Irving transplanted this archetype to the New World, but he gave it a distinctly American identity by dressing it in the uniform of a Hessian soldier. These were German mercenaries hired by the British to fight against the American revolutionaries, and they were feared and hated by the colonial population. The story specifies the Horseman was a Hessian whose head was carried away by a cannonball during the war, a visceral detail drawn from the brutal realities of the recent conflict. The setting of Sleepy Hollow itself, a secluded Dutch enclave in New York, was a real place caught between its old-world traditions and the rapid changes of a new nation. Irving used this backdrop to explore a community's deepest fears. The Horseman represents the violent, unresolved trauma of the war, a literal ghost from a bloody past that refuses to stay buried. But he also symbolizes the fear of the unknown frontier, the chaotic wilderness that lurked just beyond the ordered fields of the village. Ichabod Crane, the superstitious and greedy schoolteacher from Connecticut, embodies the new, opportunistic America, while his rival Brombones represents the rough, established local spirit. The story's ambiguity, leaving open whether the Horseman was real or a clever prank by Brom, brilliantly captures a society unsure of what is real and what is superstition. This motif of the headless rider is not unique to America. Celtic lore has the Dullahan, a fairy creature who carries his head under his arm and uses a spine as a whip whose gaze brings instant death. Why do these headless figures appear so consistently across different cultures? Perhaps because the loss of the head, the seat of identity and reason, is a universal symbol of ultimate violation and chaos. A headless spirit is one that can never be reasoned with, a monster of pure, mindless terror. The Headless Horseman endures because he is a perfect vessel for our fear of a past that can still hurt us and a future we cannot control. This journey from a literary ghost to its folkloric inspiration leads us directly to another phantom who haunts our collective imagination, a figure summoned with nothing more than a whisper in a dark room. A darkened bathroom, a whispered name repeated into a mirror, the heart-pounding anticipation of a face that should not be there. The ritual of Bloody Mary is a classic test of courage, but its origins are a patchwork of history and folklore stitched together over centuries. The name itself most famously evokes Queen Mary I of England, a 16th-century monarch whose violent campaign to restore Catholicism earned her the grim nickname Bloody Mary. Yet this historical figure is only one thread in a much older tapestry. Folklorists point out that the modern legend is a fusion, blending the Queen's terrifying reputation with ancient beliefs about mirrors. For generations, cultures around the world held that mirrors could trap a person's soul or serve as a portal to the spirit world. Gazing into one in a dimly lit room was considered a dangerous form of divination, a way to see the future or summon the dead. By the 19th century, these superstitions had been tamed into parlor games, where young people would perform similar rituals for a thrill. The name Bloody Mary became attached to this game in the 20th century, crystallizing into the urban legend we know today through schoolyard whispers and, later, its pervasive presence in films and television shows. The ritual's power lies in its potent psychological cocktail. In a dark room, staring at your own reflection, your mind begins to play tricks. The slight sway of your body can make the image seem to move independently. The low light warps your familiar features, a phenomenon known as the Troxler effect, where staring at a fixed point causes peripheral vision to fade and distort. Your own brain, primed by fear and suggestion, becomes the author of the horror, conjuring the apparition you are told to expect. This pattern of a ritual used to confront fear is not unique. In Latin American cultures, the legend of La Llorona, the weeping woman who searches for her drowned children, serves a similar purpose. Children are warned not to stray near rivers at night lest they hear her cries. Both stories act as cautionary tales, but they also provide a controlled, repeatable scenario to experience and master a primal fear. Why do we willingly step into the dark and call out for the very thing that terrifies us? Perhaps these rituals are a safe way to prove our bravery, to look into the abyss from the relative security of a friend's bathroom, confirming that we can face the unknown and emerge unscathed. The story of Bloody Mary is less about a specific ghost and more about our timeless need to give a name and a face to our deepest anxieties, a practice that finds a chilling parallel in the ancient warnings surrounding a pharaoh's final resting place. The chilling legend of the mummy's curse has haunted our imagination for a century, promising a supernatural death to any who dared violate a pharaoh's eternal rest. When Howard Carter opened the tomb of Tutankhamun in 1922, the world was primed for a story of ancient vengeance. The sudden death of Lord Carnarvon, the expedition's financial backer, just months after entering the tomb, seemed to confirm the curse's power. Newspapers across the globe sensationalized the story, reporting that a curse was inscribed on the tomb's doorway. Yet the actual evidence tells a far different and more scientific tale. Egyptologists point out that no such curse was found at the entrance to Tutankhamun's burial chamber. The famous inscription warning of death was actually discovered on a statue in an entirely different tomb, and even that was a standard protective spell, not a targeted hex. The reality is that most members of the excavation team lived long, healthy lives. Howard Carter himself, the man who first breached the seal, lived for nearly 17 years after the discovery, dying of natural causes at the age of 64. His assistant, Richard Bethel, also lived for over a decade, and his death was linked to a suspected heart attack. So what explains the handful of premature deaths that fueled the myth? Biologists suggest that sealed tombs can become breeding grounds for potentially harmful microorganisms. Centuries of decay in an airtight environment could have allowed toxic mold spores like Aspergillus to accumulate or bacteria to fester. For someone like Lord Carnarvon, who was in chronically poor health after a near-fatal car accident, a severe respiratory infection from inhaling these ancient pathogens could have been the final blow. This theory of a toxic tomb offers a natural explanation for a seemingly supernatural event. The psychological impact of suggestion cannot be overlooked either. Once the idea of a curse was planted by the media, every minor illness or accident among the team was reinterpreted through a lens of fear. A simple fever became a sign of the pharaoh's wrath, and a stumble was seen as an ancient force at work. This power of belief, the nocebo effect, can have very real physical consequences, heightening stress and weakening the immune system. The newspapers of the 1920s, competing for readers, seized upon the curse narrative because it sold copies far more effectively than the mundane truth of mold and coincidence. Why are we so drawn to the idea of a curse over a simple biological explanation? Perhaps it transforms a random tragedy into a story with meaning and poetic justice, a divine punishment for trespassing on the sacred. The curse of the pharaohs was not etched in hieroglyphs, but in the headlines of eager journalists, a powerful reminder of how easily media sensationalism can rewrite history. This journey from a manufactured mystery to a search for tangible truth leads us directly to another great American enigma, a settlement that vanished, leaving behind only a single cryptic clue. The word Croatoan carved into a post was not a message of distress, but a possible destination. When Governor John White returned to the Roanoke colony in 1590, he found the settlement completely abandoned, the 115 men, women, and children simply gone. The only clue was that single word, the name of a nearby island and the tribe that lived there. For centuries, this has been framed as a terrifying disappearance, but modern historians and archaeologists argue the evidence points toward a story not of tragedy, but of survival and integration. The prevailing theory is that the colonists, facing starvation and harsh conditions, split into smaller groups and were absorbed into local Native American communities, most likely the Croatan people. This was not a random act of desperation. The colonists had already established friendly relations with the Croatan leader, Manteo, who had even traveled to England. When White left for supplies, he instructed the colonists that if they were forced to move, they should carve the name of their destination, a clear plan they appear to have followed. Decades later, English explorers and settlers in the region began to report intriguing accounts. They met Native Americans with gray or blue eyes who spoke English and claimed their ancestors could talk from a book. One Jamestown leader even received a report of walled towns and English-style houses in the interior, and of native people wearing European clothing. These persistent stories suggest the Roanoke settlers did not vanish, but simply melted into the landscape, becoming part of the existing social fabric. Archaeological work has uncovered European artifacts, like a signet ring and pieces of a writing slate, mixed with indigenous objects at sites linked to the Croatan. Perhaps the most compelling modern evidence comes from DNA studies. Researchers have been analyzing the genetic history of the Lumbee tribe in North Carolina, who have long held oral traditions of descent from the lost colonists. While a definitive genetic link remains elusive, the ongoing research highlights how science is now probing a mystery that written records alone cannot solve. This forces us to reconsider the entire narrative. Why is our first instinct to assume a colony was wiped out, rather than that it chose to join another culture? The story of Roanoke may be the earliest and most successful example of cultural assimilation in American history, a quiet blending that stands in stark contrast to the violent conflicts that would follow. The truth of their integration offers a far more hopeful ending than any ghost story, resolving one great enigma just as we approach another born from music and betrayal. The haunting melody of the Pied Piper is more than a simple fairy tale about a broken promise. This eerie legend of a rat catcher who led a town's children away when he was not paid has a chilling historical anchor in the town of Hamelin itself. The town's chronicles record that on the 26th of June, 1284, 130 children were lost from the town, led away by a piper dressed in many colors to a place called Calvary, where they vanished. This stark municipal entry, devoid of rats or magical revenge, forces us to confront a real tragedy that a community later cloaked in symbolic narrative. Medieval historians point to this record as a rare, tangible clue, but the true nature of the calamity remains one of history's great puzzles. One prominent theory suggests the piper was a recruiter or locator, leading young people away in a colonization movement eastward. In the 13th century, lords actively recruited settlers for new territories in Eastern Europe, offering land and freedom. The loss of these young adults would have been an economic and social catastrophe for Hamelin, explained to grieving parents as being led away by a charismatic figure. Another theory connects the event to the tragic Children's Crusade of 1212, a movement where thousands of young people set out for the Holy Land, many never to return. While the dates do not align perfectly, the story could have merged over time with Hamelin's own local disaster, becoming a single, powerful cautionary tale. A darker possibility is that the children fell victim to an epidemic or a natural disaster, like a landslide, with the piper symbolizing the relentless, dancing march of death that claimed them. The legend's endurance is powerfully visualized in a stained glass window that once existed in Hamelin's church, depicting the colorful piper and the lost children, a public memorial to a trauma the town could not otherwise explain. In literature and music, the piper evolved into a complex symbol. He represents the consequences of broken contracts and social injustice, but also the seductive and dangerous power of art itself, a force that can enchant and lead the innocent astray. Why do we transform communal tragedies into stories of magical piper and stolen youth? Perhaps it is because a fairy tale can contain a pain too vast for raw history, giving a mysterious but specific shape to senseless loss. The piper provides a villain, a reason, and a moral framework for an event that might otherwise be unbearable in its random cruelty. This process of weaving fact into symbolic myth finds its ultimate expression in our final truth, where the very voice of a god was said to echo from a crack in the earth. High in the mountains of Greece, the Pythia of Delphi sat on a tripod, breathing in vapors that rose from a crack in the earth. Her cryptic words, spoken in a trance, shaped the fate of nations, from sending colonists to new lands to advising kings on the eve of war. For centuries, her power was attributed solely to the god Apollo. Yet the truth behind her visions lies at a stunning intersection of geology and human psychology. Scientific investigations of the site have revealed that the temple was built directly atop two intersecting fault lines. These geologic fractures allowed for the release of certain gases, including ethylene, a sweet-smelling hydrocarbon known to induce trance states, euphoria, and vivid hallucinations in relatively low concentrations. The priestess did not commune with a god through faith alone. She was chemically altered by the very ground she stood on. This was not a random occurrence, but a meticulously managed ritual. The Pythia was always a woman of good standing from a local village, chosen to serve for life. Before a consultation, she would undergo a series of purifications, fasting and bathing in the sacred Castalian spring. She would then descend into the temple's inner chamber, the Aditon, and inhale the intoxicating fumes rising from the fissure. Her resulting utterances were then interpreted and translated into poetic hexameters by a committee of priests who shaped the often jumbled phrases into the ambiguous prophecies for which the oracle became famous. Consider the famous case of King Croesus of Lydia. He asked the oracle if he should wage war on the Persian Empire. The prophecy declared that if he attacked, he would destroy a great empire. Interpreting this as a guarantee of victory, Croesus went to war only to see his own kingdom obliterated. The oracle was technically correct, but its ambiguity allowed for a fatal misreading. This system of divine guidance was deeply integrated into Greek political life. No major colony was founded, no significant war declared, without first seeking the approval of Apollo through his priestess. The temple complex grew immensely wealthy from the offerings of grateful or hopeful supplicants. So we must ask, does understanding the geologic mechanism behind the trance diminish the oracle's historical significance? Or does it instead reveal a more profound truth about how our ancestors ingeniously harnessed the natural world to seek answers to life's greatest uncertainties? The priestess was a conduit, but the power came from a perfect storm of geology, ritual, and the profound human need for guidance. Revealing the 28th and final truth behind these historical legends completes our journey, but it leaves us with one overarching question to ponder. These 28 unexpected truths reveal a profound pattern woven through human history. Our ancestors were not just recording events, they were crafting stories, transforming raw facts into powerful narratives that gave meaning to their world. We embellish the past to teach moral lessons, as Plato did with Atlantis, warning against the corruption of power. We reshape legends for political aims, like the Roman poets who turned Cleopatra into a villain to justify a war. And we romanticize reality for pure entertainment, transforming the hardworking cowboy into a lone gunman for the thrill of a dime novel. These myths are not lies, they are reflections of our deepest values, our fears, and our aspirations. The story of King Arthur gave a fractured nation a symbol of unity. The legend of El Dorado fed an insatiable hunger for wealth that blinded explorers to the cultures before them. The myth of the mummy's curse turned a scientific discovery into a supernatural thriller, because a curse is far more exciting than mold spores. So what does this collective habit of storytelling tell us about ourselves? It shows that our need for a good story can sometimes be stronger than our desire for the unvarnished truth. This is where critical thinking and the patient work of archaeology become our most essential tools. The cracked code of the Rosetta Stone did not rely on legend, but on meticulous comparison. The truth about the Viking settlers was not found in the frightened chronicles of monks, but in the excavated remains of their farms and marketplaces. The real fate of the Roanoke colonists points not to a supernatural disappearance, but to the tangible evidence of integration and survival. Every time we choose to look beyond the myth, we engage in a more honest conversation with our past. How many other cherished stories are waiting to be seen in a new light? What if the tales of dragons were born from the discovery of dinosaur bones, or the universal flood myths from shared memories of Ice Age meltwaters? The journey does not end here. Uncovering the truth behind these 28 legends is not about destroying our sense of wonder, but about deepening it. It invites us to become detectives of history, to question the stories we have been told, and to appreciate the incredible, complex reality that lies just beneath the surface of every great myth. These 28 revelations collectively demonstrate that our most cherished legends are rarely simple lies. They are instead profound cultural artifacts, shaped by the fears, values, and political needs of the societies that nurtured them. From King Arthur's court to the shores of Roanoke, we have seen how historical truth is often a fluid concept, molded by storytellers long after the fact. This does not diminish the past, but rather enriches it, revealing a dynamic conversation between what happened and what we need to believe happened. The historian Margaret Macmillan once observed that we embellish the past to make sense of our present, and these truths prove her point. They challenge us to become more critical listeners of the stories we inherit, to look beyond the polished surface of myth and seek the complex, often messy, reality underneath. The real adventure begins when you start questioning the tales you thought you knew. Visit a local museum and look closely at the artifacts. Read a historical analysis that challenges a popular narrative, or simply ask what deeper need a particular legend might be fulfilling. Your own journey into history is waiting. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the shadows behind the legends, subscribe for more explorations that separate fact from fiction. And we would love to hear from you. What is the one historical story that has always captivated you? Share your own favorite legend in the comments below. Remember, the greatest discoveries are not always about finding new lands, but about seeing the old stories with new eyes.